Alright, I have a half-page scene here. It's, what is this? 8.5 by 5.5. Half of a, US letter size piece of paper. So it's going to be fairly large as far as card formats go. And I'm going to focus this whole thing around this Leavenworth Jackson image, and I believe it's called fly writing something. Fly writing something. H. I don't know. That was Stampa Barbara's code, and whether this is available or not, I don't know. I think Leavenworth is still out there. You can check out their website at least. And I haven't used this image in a really long time. In fact, a lot of the images that I'm going to be using on this, I haven't used in a very long time. But I was looking at some of my fusion scenes recently, and I really like this image. In fact, I like all the images that I have, of course. That's why I bought it, but I figured it was time to use it again. And then there's this transportation, challenge on the Facebook to Stampscapes group, and that little bug is transporting that little pixie there, so, kind of a fun little, example of that theme. So, let's see what we can do with this. Okay. Now I'm really composing this on the fly here, so it's not going to be one of those things I consider a fast, quick card. I wonder if I could do a half-page quick card scene. If you haven't seen any of my recent videos, they're cards that, it would be really cool. I'm sure I could do some form of a, 5-minute card, but most of them around, about 12 to 15 minutes or so, roughly. And, okay, now I've just inked up this cloud stamp here, and I've wiped off this part, because I'm going to have this part kind of really close to that little figure, okay? And I want that figure to look like it's kind of coming out of the clouds or something like that. It might not be really high up in the air or something like that, but kind of just in general, this will be a real whimsical kind of a theme to this composition if I do it right, or I don't know if I get anywhere close to kind of the general concept that I have in mind. I don't have a really firm. I don't even have a real. I don't know. I would consider it a very, very weak kind of concept in terms of the end result. I just have some real general kind of notions on kind of some of the elements that I want to use in this scene. So I don't have anything really pictured in my mind as far as kind of an end result would be. And that's how I always work. I don't really have like firm concepts, visual kind of concepts, as far as the end, what something might look like, okay? Or what I might hope for it to look like. I kind of have more of an idea of how I hope, the end result will feel, kind of, in spirit. And don't think that I always get that either. A lot of times I don't. But I still want to have something kind of cool to look at, and that's fine with me. But I am really not discouraged by kind of all of these kind of unforeseen things that happen along the way of the creation, of a composition. I've mentioned this before, but I don't know. I generally have a notion of kind of going along with the scene, and it's already happening on this one. I'm kind of thinking of things that I might want to happen from here on, having seen these clouds like this. But it's not firm at all. I mean, I have some elements of certainly, you know, these stamps that I'm, you know, going to be using in here, or I think I might use in there. But who knows? I might not use them in there, depending on how things go. How dark the clouds are, for example. Maybe they'll be too dark for some of the things that I might want to put over the top of them. So, I don't know. Let it flow. Let your your cards and your compositions go in a direction that they might want it to go in. Which is, you know, it's one of those things. A lot of times, if you're kind of new to scenic stamping, and if we're doing these kind of coming from an area where we're kind of following along kind of instructions on how to do a really specific construction of a card using certain elements and colors and whatnot, and media and techniques, that's a good way to go, and we get some really great results as a result of it. It's like following a recipe, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But this is just kind of another option for you. You know, what you usually do is you can do tweaks. What you do is if you don't have certain images, but you have others that are similar, you can kind of mix and match. You know, if we don't have that image right there, you can put something else in there, and you can just do all kinds of variations. And you know, there's a high level of creativity as far as kind of variation goes within your compositions or projects that you're working on. All right, that blue that I was working with, that pad is starting to crumble on me. It's very, very old, and I can see a bunch of little crumbly bits in there. You can see my impressions are a little bit, see those darker bits right there? That's a bit of the stamp pad coming off. But we're talking about probably a 20-year-old pad or something like that. I have no problem with my pads kind of disintegrating or whatnot after hours and hours of use like that they've given me over the years. Okay, so this is my Sedge filler stamp. I'm going to create this kind of a grassy bank here, okay? So I'm putting this down like that. That'll be kind of my foreground texture, okay? Now what I was planning on doing is I was planning on putting this, I want this whole thing to be really kind of almost forested, but on a kind of a worm's eye view. So very small little, like a micro scene here. Like, I don't know, is that what you would call it? Something like that. Now I'm going to use this worm here, because nothing says kind of, you know, worm's eye view as, you know, having some very close-up views of some bugs here. So let's see, let me come up here, let me put some other, the Sedge filler can just fill in anywhere you want it to go at any given level. So I'll put some like that. Okay, and I was thinking about an angled view. Sometimes if you have different angles within a composition, it creates kind of a nice visual dynamic to the piece. All right, now I'm just going right over that cloud, but I am masking off that Sedge filler right there. This might look kind of weird here. So this by itself right here will kind of look a little bit out of place, but I'm bringing in a lot of other imagery into the scene after I do this, so hopefully I can really build it up. Okay, so I'm just going for a little bit of texture right there. I'm not worried about that cloud showing up in that wood because I'm going to fill in that wood with some additional tone. Okay, now see how I've put that piece of wood there? Maybe another one. I don't think I've ever done this twice in a scene before. First time for everything. Let's go for a couple of these, and we'll kind of set up a nice kind of foundation right here with some, don't know if they're representing a fallen tree or something like that. You could be kind of more of a, just they could be roots to a very large tree or something like that, or just branches, because again, I'm not trying to represent, like gigantic caterpillars or something like that. It's just supposed to be kind of a very worm's eye view, from the forest floor type of thing. Okay, so let's see if I can get this on there. I'm not bothering with stamp position. I'm just looking at the bottom of these legs right here. This is from 100 Proof Press. Okay, now this company is definitely still out there. You can find this worm. Online, it's Q3895 is their code for this. Q3895, or it used to be at least, if that's what the current code is. But see, that little worm right there, that's kind of fun. Anyways, can you kind of see it coming along right now? I definitely don't have the kind of the final kind of concept in mind still. Now this cool leaf branch is from Serendipity Stamps from 2010. I don't know anything about this company. I don't know where I got this. At a show, maybe? Or something, I'm not really quite sure. Okay, let's add a little bit more sedge filler back here, okay? So it kind of sandwiches those wood pieces, and yeah, I just stamped right over that caterpillar, and it doesn't really matter, right? Because this is nice and light and airy. Doesn't require masking. I'm too lazy to mask too much. I'll mask a little bit, but I usually don't like doing too much of it, or having to do too much of it. Okay, so now I could bring in, well, maybe I'll bring in a little bit more color into this, but I'm not really bothering to do like that wood there. I could have done it brown. I'm not doing too much of that just because it's just easier to not bring too many multicolored, faceted colors into these objects, although it's pretty good when you do, but, I'm planning on making this fairly dark, so, but, okay, let me go on this Serendipity Stamps branch, right here's plant. This is really designed quite well. I like the negative space in it. A lot of people, when they're doing designs, they're not considering the negative space of an image, which is really important for the kind of the natural flow and harmony of an image. And that's when you can really tell if someone really knows what they're doing or not. It's when the negative space is considered. Otherwise, things aren't quite as harmonious, within the imagery, and especially when we're doing rubber stamps and we're talking about printing tools and the repetition of imagery. When you do things over and over again and get a lot of it down, that kind of negative space really comes into play. And even if you're not totally thinking about that consciously, I think it hits us on a subconscious level. There's just a kind of a more, I don't know, there's a nice flow to things and with harmony and whatnot. So that's what I look for when I look for my kind of my private collection stamps. And that's what I'm kind of drawn to. Okay, so we can see a little bit of variation in there in terms of the green. Okay. But see, we're starting to add these in there, and it's starting to ground it a little bit more in terms of what size things are supposed to be, where we are in relation to these objects. Okay, I'll put this one out here. I think when we look at this little object right there, that little figure, I don't picture this, you know, little fairy. I mean, it has a little branch and it looks like a lily of the valley or something like that. I don't picture it like flying around in the desert like in a really arid terrain. I'm thinking about a lot of life and growth. So kind of filling this in, I think, is kind of lending itself to that spirit right there. Okay, so adding some more of this in the foreground. Isn't that kind of a fun image? And like I said, Stampscapes, I've mentioned this in another video too, especially the fusion ones. Stampscapes, they've really been designed to attempt to kind of bring a lot of value to like other companies' images, okay? So you get this individual little stamp like that, but when I'm done with this, I want it to be, you know, that little image to be almost kind of like in a, like super kind of ornate frame or setting for these other types of images, okay? So hopefully this kind of this foundation of the sky, and in this case, that's almost like a midground or something like that, and this is foreground down here, but it's all designed to be, to really enhance kind of the overall whatever compositional theme or subject matter throughout any given scene. This whole area, you know, I could left, you know, this cloud thing around there and we could have done a word stamp or something like that, but what a grand word stamp. You know, let's say someone enjoys gardening that you're doing a card for, and if I did plants or something like that, and these clouds in a circular format with, you know, instead of that little opening there for that little figure, but if you put just happy birthday in there with a big, you know, kind of a, you know, floral type of composition around it, it would really look, you know, that word stamp would really look quite spectacular, I think. So you can do all kinds of things. It doesn't have to be just a scene, you know, with you know, a deer in the middle. It could be just to enhance anything from imagery to, you know, something like words. Okay, now I'm going black on here, and I'm just putting a little bit of green on here. I think if I just went all green, I think it would look a little bit anemic for the amount of tone that I'm going to be bringing into this. So let's keep it fairly dark. And if you notice, when I'm doing this branch, see, I'm kind of changing the angle of it and using a larger portion of it at times, smaller portion of it at times, to hopefully kind of eradicate this notion that I've just used the same image over and over and over again. Now, as rubber stampers, you know, I've done that, but I don't want it to be so visually obvious. All right, now this one, you know, one of the kind of nice things that we can do is to vary things like that, but I also want to make this a little bit more kind of plush in terms of from a textural standpoint. So we have this grass down here in the form of the sedge filler, and I'm thinking about bringing in some additional grasses, but things like these reeds, I think I'm going to hold off until the end when I'm adding in kind of my final touches in here. I have this little space right in here I still want to fill in with something else, and this would be perfect if I had this in a second size, but I don't. I'm starting to get a lot of that now, so I want to go with something else, I think. I want to go with, maybe we can go with some bushes or something like that, something soft, like these trees, but I won't use them as trees. I guess they could be, but the thing that states that this is a tree, okay, are those trunks sitting at the base. This is called the maple pear image, okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to mask this off like this, and I'm going to use it just for the kind of the structure of the tops right there, and I'll put that right in there, okay? And I can put another one down here if I want to, which maybe I will. So now instead of it being kind of a tree, it's, you know, kind of a more of a bushy kind of structure. Even you can put it in the foreground too. We're stamping it over the top of this image. I don't know what the name of this one is, but see, it just kind of, it looks like texture, and it doesn't look like it's in front of this one because this image right here is solid, where this one right here is more airy, so you can put things right over it, or that could be in our foreground image, or create, it can be our, you know, it can be a image with, you know, without anything in front of it, but you can do something, you can stamp it right over the top of something and it'll look like it's farther back, depending on how solid your other image is. I don't know, does that make sense? The more solid and dark something is, the closer it's going to look to you. Okay, so we're getting a lot of texture going in here, aren't we? Sometimes I even go for things like, you know, like these rocks in here. Something like that. I want it alive, you know, and really kind of bursting at the seams with growth. And maybe you come up with the overhanging tree limb in here. This right here, boy, I tell you, that pad of mine sure was crumbly. I'm not going to use that one anymore except to color in. But let's start coloring in. Okay, I had some other types of images too. Let me see if I can put some of these in here. This is like these moths. The question is, do I do it now or later? Let's do it right now. I think. Maybe not. Here's a butterfly. If I put it right back there, it looks kind of ominous, right? Yeah, so maybe if I put it out here, these butterflies fluttering around, or they're kind of moths. So I was thinking about, let's hold off right there. Yeah. So this is where, you know, you kind of come up with things and compose things on the fly. Okay. Let's see. Let's go with this. Not the broken china. Where's my tumbled glass? Here it is. I would use my Adirondack Aqua, but let's use some things that are more readily available now. The Marvy inks are all readily available. Not a lot of places carry that. It's one of those kind of... It shouldn't be. Most people have heard of Marvy pads, but, you know, they're not the... in terms of public consciousness, even with their target audience, they're not as well known. Marvy is just a much bigger company, and I don't know how much they've focused on kind of the paper crafts and rubber stampers and whatnot, because they're doing everything, but they're really great inks. Okay, that being said, you can get things like Marvy's, Tumbleless, and stuff like that. Ranger discontinued Ocean Aqua, but it's fantastic. That being said, any kind of light dye-based ink would work fine here in this case, okay? Alright, so I'm adding this down. This is tumbled glass again, and it is a fairly... It's not real super light blue, but it's fairly light blue. Adding this down, okay? I want some of these clouds to be, you know, to be reflecting the light that's coming out of that area right in there, okay? So don't tone everything out. I don't see this whole area of this clouded area as something to be filled in, okay? So but you're not doing something too different from that spirit. You're just kind of retaining some of the lighter areas, okay? And don't think of it in terms of like how super specific it has to be, okay? I'm just leaving some clouds light and some areas darker. But on these clouds right here, you can see there's darker areas within the design itself. And those are the areas that I'm just kind of starting to tone in. So you see this kind of darker area right here and it's lighter up there. So a lot of times I'm coloring in this area with my color, okay? And you have to go with a color that's a little bit lighter than the color that you stamped the impressions with, okay? If it's lighter than the color that we stamped our impression with, then we can still see the forms. If we stamped it out in this tumbled glass and when we put a little tone over it, you really wouldn't be able to see it anymore. You know, the form. Which in some cases is okay. You can kind of have things kind of drift in and out of visibility, maybe you can say. But I want my clouds to be visible, so. Okay, see that right there? Now, so doesn't it feel like we have a little bit more of a lighting scheme up there now? Okay. All right, hold on a second. All right. Thought something was there, but maybe not. Okay, let's put some of this down in my grass. You're saying blue grass. Well, blue is a component of green, right? So I'm adding this down here, and I'm adding it at the base of this large kind of log. It's a tree trunk is the name of the stamp, but we'll just call it a kind of almost like a fallen log here in this case. Okay, I'm adding this down at the base of things. When here's one of the kind of the nice things about using a re-inker. See, I haven't even re-inked this. It just goes a really long way. And I didn't use a ton of it. I just, put a couple drops down. But it's given me a lot of mileage in terms of coverage because, I've turned my stylus tool here into like an ink pad on a stick. That's what essentially we're doing here. Okay, so you can see that right down there. Say I've kind of put shadows down here, left some areas light, just as I have applied it up here, and made some of those areas darker, but retained light. Same thing down here. This is a little bit too much right here, so I'll just break it up a little bit. I'll put a little bit of color in here, so it goes from light, dark, yeah. And you just kind of oscillate it a little bit like that. All right, now I'm picking up some of the black ink off there, so it kind of looks a little bit smudgy, but this whole scene's going to get fairly dark, so that's not going to really matter to me too much. Would I prefer it not be smudgy? Yeah, I would, but it's not really going to affect things beyond, just that initial kind of smudgy appearance at this point in the process. When I kind of come into it with other elements and techniques, not even going to matter that much, if I really look close, then maybe, but not really. Okay, this is a distress peeled paint. Okay, we'll go with some green colored schemes. I like the kind of the aged kind of styling of this line of inks. I like bright, but I also like very kind of aged. Okay, now I don't use one or the other. I usually use those kind of components in conjunction with one another. I'm not talking about brand or line. I'm just talking about, specific colors. See that right there? How it kind of looks, or how it does look. Okay, now see, I'm going into this area right down there. There was kind of an impression of some of those clouds, but now when I'm filling this in like this and coloring, we've lost some of that blue impression of the cloud because I'm coloring it over with, at this stage, blue and green. Okay, so I'm kind of building it up a little bit. Okay, so speaking of kind of bright tones, let's go with this Marvy one right in here. This one's a yellow-green. It looks pretty bright to me. Let me blot off some of this. Now I will have some of these other colors in here, so I'm not using this, just the straight version of this. I just blotted off my tip there, and I'm just going straight into it like that. See how much it's a little bit brighter, and it kind of wakes up that area. So we get the benefit of having something a little bit more mellow and earthy, but we get the brightness of this other color. Used by itself, it would be too bright for me, though. It would be too kind of electric looking. But layered over the top or under, kind of a more earthy, mellow version of green. It looks great like that. One of the brightest greens that I know of is yellow, light green by Marvy one. Okay, see that? There's a certain intensity to it, like right there. See that difference between right there and say over here? It's a little bit dull, right? But you put that in there, and it just kind of brightens it up a little bit. There's an intensity to it, but it doesn't look so hot green. If I were to use this green by itself, it's too much. But used in conjunction with one another, and those two make beautiful music together, so to speak. Okay, all right. Okay, here's a much darker green. Let me just use this one. I have some memento here. This cottage ivy would be a good one too. Kind of hitting it in my shadow areas. Sometimes the brightest colors are in the shadows, okay? Brightest does not mean lightest, okay? Brightest is talking about intensity of a given color. Bright and dull. Okay? Light and dark is a matter of value, not intensity. Alright, so see this kind of coming along right that? It was kind of becoming a real similar value in here, but now when I hit it with some darker values like that, that area in there now looks lighter by contrast. Alright, let's try that memento here. Cottage ivy. I don't know if it's darker than that previous green or not. It looks like it. Looks pretty good too. It looks pretty bright. Brighter than I thought it would be. It's almost like a Christmassy green, which I like as a foundation here, but it's almost too bright, so I'll go over it with another color, and I'll show you what I do with that. Something I really like to do in kind of green areas. Okay, so it's kind of going along here, so we're kind of making a nice foundation right here. Okay, so I'll show you what I do. Oh, I'm looking for this. There it is right here. This is my dark brown. Let's use the same stylus tool as that green that I just used, okay? And let's hit some of these areas right at the base of the tree trunks. I will put some of this brown to really kind of anchor them into the scene. We're giving them opacity. We're saying that having that object there in accordance with the lighting, that's in here, we're saying that light is hitting it somewhere. We don't have to get so caught up in, well, let's see, which direction is lighting coming from? I wouldn't say it doesn't matter, but it matters less than you think. Because let's say we're outside, and without, kind of a, man-made light or something like that, like a spotlight hitting something. Okay, we would have single source of light, and it would be shining down, but we would have reflected light bouncing off and hitting things too. But some of the most dramatic lighting that you can do would be like on a movie set, or like a stage production of something where someone, lighting director, has multiple sources that they can use, and you can stage something really dramatically, and you can get the viewer to look wherever you want them to look, or to focus on at least, just by basically where you're positioning those lights and where you're shining them, in what intensity and whatnot. And that's the way you can approach your scenes, kind of more like a lighting director, because this is a world that you're creating yourself, and it can look any way you want it to. Alright, and you don't have to have some kind of general, a really definitive lighting scheme in mind. What I do is I just kind of start to light certain areas, and then at the base of things like these trees and these whatever they are, fallen branches or whatnot, roots, whatever, the tree trunks, I'm just putting a little bit of tone, the darkest of tones right at the base of it, and I keep building it up, from the lighter tones to the mid tones to the darker tones. Those are the areas that I focus on a little bit more. And see how they're kind of really anchored into the scene like that, right? So it just means that don't bring in that color everywhere. Just put it at the base of things, your darkest of tones, like at the base of some of your objects within that given area. So it's some people think it's harder to do. But I mean, it's one of those things that you have to kind of think about a little bit, but you don't have to think about it too much. Just don't color in everything. It's really less work, because a lot of people will color in this all the same, meaning light colors, medium colors, dark colors, and then pretty soon you don't have any lighting on there because there isn't light patches left in there. When you get down to the medium tones, just kind of focus them in the shadows. Okay, so let's take a look at, let's go back up to these wooden elements within the scene, and I'll color them in with a little bit of a lighter brown. There's all kinds of distress ink browns out there that are really fantastic that you can use. I will just use this Marvy brown. Okay, and maybe you don't color in the whole thing, just kind of follow suit like you were doing before. Don't color in everything exactly the same. I'm bringing some of this into my shadow area down here, into the grass. That. See that wood right there? Okay. Alright, let's see. Let's bring some of that more of that brown. Actually, that looks really good down there in that grass. Look at that tone right in there. It's kind of glowing, isn't it? Almost looks like orange, but it's just taking that same brown and putting it over that green. I really like that. Let's bring some of that down here into this area. Yeah, it's kind of a, I think that's beautiful, that tone right there. Like that. Kind of brings a little bit of harmony to that area, doesn't it? Okay, so let's go back up into the sky area. It's starting to look a little bit it's looking a little bit too light, I think. I think we can hit it with some darker tones. What color to do that with? Let's hit it with some blues, because it is a blue color scheme. Alright, I used tumbled glass in there. Okay, let's hit it with the light blue that we stamped out our images in. Okay. Kind of darkening my perimeter to make it look a little bit more kind of focused in terms of the lighting right here. Giving a strong kind of perimeter vignette around the composition. I'm going to go into some of that grass a little bit more. It doesn't really read as light blue down there, but it just kind of makes it a little bit darker. Okay. All right. Let's go in with a blue here. And that's the name of the color. It's just blue from Marvy. It's one of their basic colors. It's the number 3. Marvy number 3 blue. It's kind of a navy blue. Alright, do I have a clean stylus tool here? Yeah. This is tipless. Okay, let's see. I need one that's clean enough, or it's kind of in the blue colored. I've been doing so much stamping. With my quick card series, you can really do a lot of cards when you're doing that quick card series. Needless to say, but I don't know. I'm saying that for me, you know. I don't know. I hadn't really done too many of that type of. I wouldn't call them a speed card because I'm still getting all my different techniques in there, but you can really churn out a lot of cards. Okay, this is a Caribbean blue. I wanted to warm up the sky a little bit with a slight tinge of warmer blue up in that area, which would hopefully kind of match the warmer kind of landscape down below with all the kind of warm green tones and browns and whatnot. This will kind of bring in some of that warmth into the sky. Kind of are a bit of a temperature match. Okay. I don't know, can you tell that it's a little bit warmer up there now? So it's this color right here. Kind of matches right in with that, huh? Not quite so warm that it looks kind of turquoise, but it's just a slight tinge of warmth. Kind of makes it a little bit more inviting, maybe, when you kind of tweak temperatures like that. It could even be like a really slight version of some temperature change, but I feel it really reads, you know, within the whole kind of greater whole. Okay. Let's move even darker now, okay? I have all these re-inkers here. Let's keep things moving along a little bit faster. If I would have known, I could have kind of, you know, poured a little thin out. This blueprint one is really cool. Love that color. But this is Prussian blue right here. It's really dark Marvy blue. Okay. This is the one that kind of is my step next to black when I bring that into the mix. Okay, putting it down here in the terrain as well, hitting it in my shadows a little bit. Finishing off this tree a little bit here. Even though the tree is brown, it's kind of in a, this darkness over there in the corner, so it doesn't really read. It's just blue that I'm kind of filling it out with. See that? It's looking a little bit more substantial. I need to color in those, but I'm going to do that with pens because those are much more kind of fine. Fine line coloring jobs. Okay, I have black here, okay, so we're going all the way to dark right here. Just this little edge. I don't know what to call this. It's kind of putting that corner vignette on there, but I've always called it tipping the edges. It's just putting that little bit. I mean, you can bring it in much farther, but I really like going on that edge right there. See that edge right there? And see how it really frames that corner off? Like that. When you do those little things like that, it really kind of helps in the composition. Kind of helps in the composition as far as containment goes. Okay, tipping the edges down here to the bottom left and right corner. This area in here would be kind of cool with some ripped paper towel technique, but I'm going to be stamping something in the foreground down there, up there anyway, so I'm not going to bother getting it too busy back in there. Okay, a little bit more shading around this log. I have this stylus tool on its edge like this. When I'm doing that, I'm just going for this kind of thinner angle line. Okay. Okay, so let's take a look at some of these. Well, not some, my two figures in here, okay? And let's just grab some different alcohol pens. Colors that might work well with those characters. Okay, so I'm going with that color right there. I think for this caterpillar, I've seen those types of caterpillars. Aren't they kind of like striped with like green and red or something like that? Not green and red, but green and yellow. So let's do some of that. Okay. So it says kind of don't eat me, I'm poisonous. Certain color schemes, right? This yellow and green almost look really similar. So I'll bring in some more. See, just as I'm kind of coloring an imagery like this, and especially with these different types of sets out there. This is an 88 color set. That was $40, which is quite reasonable to me. $40 is, you know, a decent amount of money, but 50 cents a pen is a pretty good deal in my opinion. Sometimes if you spend you know, $40 with some brands, you might get, you know, 8 pens or 5 pens or something like that, but this one gave me 88 for $40, so it's a little bit less than 50 cents a pen. So if you have one pen that you use, I don't know, a couple times on a couple things, you know, it's not too bad as if you spent $5. I'm not saying those, you know, more expensive pens aren't worth it. They are awesome, but there are certain colors that we just don't use very often. It's kind of nice, you know, having a nice big set so that you can at least choose from it should you want to utilize those different hues or values of those hues. Alright, so kind of adding in a lot of little different tones into that caterpillar, even where it's kind of white though. Maybe I'll add in a little bit of tone to it, just so it's not so bare looking. This is a little bit of brown, I'll put it across that, and I can hit this area right here underneath that caterpillar, just as I've added some shadows underneath those types of things. I'll add it with light brown. Oh, let's go with a warm gray. How about at the base? Not that chisel tip right there. Hit it with a fine tip underneath that caterpillar, just to have that caterpillar casting somewhat of a shadow. Okay, so yeah, it's kind of coming to life. You use kind of multiple tones. You can kind of play around with it a little bit. Here's a yellow green. I don't know if I've already used this one. Maybe I did, but I'll add it into little spots around that gray. I mean the green that I've laid down. Sometimes if you go light on top of dark, it kind of puts the dark back into solution, but you can kind of get some nice textures just by kind of wiggling, you know. You can get that alcohol kind of, you know, binder separation, you know, where it kind of separates out. This is blue, and you can bring a little bit of blue to kind of, you know, reiterate some of those colors of the sky. But when I put it over green, it's just another version of blue, but it kind of makes it relate to, you know, the surrounding area a little bit more. Okay, now I have that little pixie up there. Let's go for something just very light. This is a pink, okay? No, they wouldn't be pink, but I'll try to blend in some tones, okay? And actually the color box stylus tool wouldn't be real conducive for this type of work. That's why, you know, you just kind of utilize your different colors for, this is salmon pink. Utilize your different tools for the different purposes you'll be using them for. So I went with the salmon. Let's go back to the pale pink again. So I'll just kind of blend that in a little bit. The dragonfly is kind of something I'm not really quite sure what to color it in. Let me hit it with some of this blue here. Its wings, its head. Okay, but I don't like that just on its own, so I'll come back into it with kind of a much lighter blue here, and I'll mix some of that in. I'll blend it a little bit more than it is. So a lot of times I go light, then dark, then light again, just to blend that out. Put it on some of those little pixie's wings. When you have things that are rendered out, anytime you have like an outline image, I find it's really beneficial to define those forms of those outlined images through the use of shade, okay? So the more outlined something is, it kind of puts more of the onus on us to render those shadows that are already inherent in other types of images, okay? So I would always recommend kind of coloring them in to some extent so that as far as volumes go, you know, the forms, the three-dimensional forms, they match a little bit more closely the other things that are going on within the scene. Okay, so does that make sense? So if I had all these things down here, but that little character wasn't kind of fleshed in as well, they were just kind of an outline, it would kind of, it wouldn't match very well. Things would look kind of like different. There would be a different approach. There wouldn't be any lighting, say, for example, on that figure, but there's lighting on everything else. So you're saying that it's kind of in its own world or whatever. Okay, now, so, see, I'm hit. Ooh, that's really pink. I don't want that. If I put that one down, I'd have to really blend it in. Boy, that's a really awesome pink, though, for something else. But I have to use the right side of this. It seems like that one's a little bit of a darker, so maybe I'll kind of hit the shadows a little bit on that little figure. And maybe I can match it, you know, this little pixie nature sprite is in harmony with nature, so maybe it's some of the colors off of this dragonfly that it's riding have those same color on it. So see, I mean, it's real subtle, but I mean, I did address it with a few different tones. So now we have some lighting and shade on it. Just we have lighting and shade down here, like so. All right. I was thinking I'd like to hit this with some kind of that bleed-proof white, just in terms of some texturing on here. But maybe I won't. So that was one of those original those types of examples where you have kind of this initial concept, and the difference between that and the final result sometimes is quite different. But that was just one of those things that where I was that I was thinking about. But I don't know, the scene kind of took a different turn. Maybe, I don't know, maybe I'll put a little bit in there. Well, I'll see if I can kind of fit it into the mix, so to speak. Okay, I'm looking for my white pigment ink. Let me get some things, all my supplies that I need, and all right. So we have some Hero Hues. Hero Arts, Hero Hues, Unicorn White. It's just a white pigment ink. It's a little bit more opaque than some white pigment inks out there, and I will start applying it in some of my lighter areas, okay? I usually work from light to dark, just so it doesn't stand out so much in a dark area, and I usually don't put any in dark areas anyways. But let's put some of this kind of soft element around. Now, if you haven't watched any of my videos before, I'm always warning about using too much of this ink. Like, what happens is people do this, they ink up like that, okay? And they get these big blobs everywhere, okay? Which is not what we're going after, of course. So that's why you can't really tell, but I'm getting these blobs right in here, but it's white over white, so it's not really anything bad looking. But what I'm doing here in this lighter area, this is why I've retained some of the lighter areas, is that the more I tap this off, the drier it becomes on this. There's less ink, you know, on there. let me even kind of obscure some of this imagery back there that I don't want too light, dark, you know, the black that I stamped it out in. But see, I can kind of lighten it like that, so now that image is a little bit more dimensional. Doesn't it look like it's coming out from, you know, the light a little bit? So I can lighten this up so it goes from dark to light back there. Let me put a little bit on the tail. Well, let me see if I can do it while holding this right here. See, I'm just tapping it very lightly like that. So I've illuminated, you know, some of its backside, right? So it's like in the light where it's backlit right there. I put a little bit over the top of that pixie and see on the back of the head a little bit like that. So it looks like they're coming out of the that lit area behind them. Okay, see that right there? It's a really fun process to do, to kind of manipulate lighting in a really easy way. Now, where it gets hard though is when there's too much ink on here and people start applying it too hard. Now, what you want is just a very light touch, but see, I know it's going to build up like that, but what happens is, let's say people get exactly the right amount that they want on this little applicator, okay? Q-tip. And they go like this, 1, 2, 3, and they can't see anything, so they pound it and they get a big blob, okay? But what you do is you just kind of build it up through, you know, repetitive tappings like this, and you'll get exactly the right amount that you want through that repetition, okay? So don't kind of pound it. I mean, you could if it's very dry on here and you're doing it in a very light area, then you can tap it a little bit more because it's so dry on your tip, you know, that you have to kind of give it a little bit more force. But you know, these little Q-tip swabs can hold a lot of ink, and a lot of our white pigment ink pads are very, very juicy because we just don't use them so much. So I have one pad of mine that's really quite dry, but that's after like 20 years of usage without a single re-inking, taking it to shows and stuff and whatnot. But just in general, most people's pads are pretty wet and juicy. I always use the caveat, well, maybe if you're in Arizona, you know, and things are a little more arid, Utah, I don't know, wherever, very arid areas, Nevada, maybe it would, you know, typically dry out a little bit faster. Okay, so then right there, it's kind of giving a nice kind of soft glow maybe around some of these clouds where I've retained the lightness, okay? It stands out too much, you know, in these areas, so I'll be using it in a couple different ways though. So this area down here, maybe I can put a little bit of fog and mist down on this ground too. I don't do this in the quick scenes too much, just a little bit, but I don't add so much kind of little details, and I wouldn't be doing, you know, quick scenes on a, you know, usually on a half-page formatted card either. So see this right down here, I'm kind of adding it in this lit area. It's kind of a little mist on the you know, the ground. Kind of lends itself to kind of a more whimsical type of feel, like a movie. You know, where they always have a forested area. There's always someone, you know, that's running a kind of a fog machine. There's always fog in movies, kind of in forests. Okay, let me add some over the top of some of this caterpillar just to kind of, I don't know, yeah, kind of work it into the mix from a textural standpoint, just slightly. All right. It's probably the most effective right around that figure, just obscuring some of it coming out of the light. So when we look at their overall, looks like that. All right, now is it time for some versifying? This is the part where I'm always kind of wondering if I add this bleed-proof white, it really adds this textured surface, and then can I go over the textured surface with the stamped impressions or not? I don't remember, so let's try it. Or do I do that in the... Okay, I'm thinking about it. Let me just try it. Experiment. I just added some water to this yesterday. I need to add a little bit more. Dr. Martin's bleed-proof white and opaque watercolor paint. Okay, and I've just reconstituted it a little bit. I'm just using an old toothbrush. It was probably medium fibers or something, or soft. I don't think I don't know if it's soft. It was medium soft. I don't know. Or even toothbrushes aren't. Seems like they're all soft. Otherwise they dig into your teeth, but I don't know. Okay, let's see. I'm taking some of that into my brush here. Taking out some excess because I don't want big blobs, preferably. I don't know. I should have cleaned out this brush from last night's scene, but I didn't. I might be getting a little bit of powder on my piece, which will just come right off. But okay, let's see what we can do here. Now this is just supposed to represent kind of little lighting, I don't know, pixie dust, whatever, little magic, little dust coming from that figurine. It could be lighting or something like that, I don't know. I always have to kind of see which way this thing is splattering. I can't tell sometimes. It's kind of coming back this way. I'm going like that, thinking it's going out that way, but it's coming from the opposite way. I don't have great brush control. Can you see what it's doing? It's adding this little kind of marks like that. But isn't that fun? See like that? I don't think I don't want to go too extreme, but okay, getting a little bit more a better feel. It's because I didn't wash off this brush, so it's kind of stiff, so I usually know a little bit more about where it's going. But there is a kind of a certain, there's always an element of what's the word I'm looking for? Of the unexpected, I guess. unpredictable. All right, so there's that splatter in there. Isn't that kind of a fun texture though? Like so. Does it make sense from a kind of a visual narrative? I don't know if it does, but I like it, and I don't even care if it does. You know, this is the way your fingers look after that, but that just, it washes right off in the sink, no problem. Dye-based inks tend to stain my fingers a little bit, but that paint will come right off. Okay, so we have that going on, and we've used some alcohol pens. Let's go in with some of our gel pens and add some gel pen markings to some areas. We've added shadows using dye-based inks, right? So let's go into some of these areas and add a little bit of highlighting. Okay, so maybe this is a little bit of a pastel green. I can add some little touches up here in the tree. You barely see it because it's this pen is about the same, the color is about the same value as, you know, the ink that I've laid in those areas, so that's not really showing up too well. It's getting a little bit more textured though with this. Let's just go in straight with a white pen. This is a Uniball Signo pen. Okay, and what I'm doing is I'm adding in those little textures here and there. Like at the tops of some of these trees. I kind of cluster it here and there. The tendency for people that first try this out, and I've mentioned this before, is to put every dot like, I don't know, it's like a quarter-inch apart from each other. So everything's like perfectly spaced, but I'm trying to make it a little bit more random or clustered and whatnot. And when I say tendency for people, I'm talking about myself as well, so I've had to kind of fight against that. There's this kind of inherent patterning that we all seem to do. From, you know, my experience of seeing people utilize this. And it just, I don't know, it always stays with me. So I have to consciously think, you know, about not doing that when I'm doing this. You can see that texture down there. You see, doesn't it bring that area to life a little bit? In conjunction with that splatter painting version. And we can go up and we can highlight some of these clouds and whatnot, but I don't think I'm going to bother doing that. It's fun. You can bring in some greens down here, some lime greens or something like that. Here's a lime green. This one's shuttle art. Ooh, boy, that's like neon green. Over the top of things, though, over the top of white, it's neon green, but when you put this over the top of other colors, the other colors show through a little bit because these pens are a little bit more translucent, which kind of works in a good way because it incorporates the colors that you've already laid down into the mark of this pen. So there's a little bit more kind of harmony that's created as a result of having common similar tones running throughout your piece. Okay, so bringing this in here and there. Okay, let me draw a couple larger things because I'm going to do this thing with, or I do these little glowing little orbs. So let's make some of these little dots a little bit bigger, or a lot bigger, so they kind of stand out. See that bigger one right there? I'll put some in front of some objects this, okay? And I'll show you what I'm going to do with this. So I'm going to be bringing in kind of this element of light within these spaces that maybe you could use it a little bit more. They're kind of, they look okay from a visual standpoint, but I think they can look better by bringing in these little hovering little orbs here, at least in terms of this scheme that I'm working in. Kind of see, I'm kind of placing them too. I'm spacing them out too, so I'll kind of group a couple. I'll put some a little bit closer, together, but otherwise they're too perfectly spaced here. Here, I'll put in this one really big one right here. Okay. This is like one of those Disney movies, one of these little sprites leading, the little princess to a certain thing, or little fairies kind of hovering about. Okay, so we have our pigment ink applicator here still. This is almost getting a little bit too frayed. Let me see if I can use this still. Okay, I'm blotting off some of it here too, okay? And here's my pad, by the way, that I dipped into, okay? So let's go down here and check out what we'll do with this. Yeah, there's way too much on here. It's giving me a blob. I want a very faint, kind of glowing application of this, meaning it's very dry and very translucent, okay? So it just kind of gives this little glowing little look around that gel pen dot. See that right there? So you're kind of little glowing little orbs. It's a way to add kind of this little element of light back into it. It's like these little glowing little orbs, like little hovering lights within your piece, okay? See that right there? It looks a little more magical, I think, having those down there. Maybe I can put some of these, with that larger splatter painting technique, maybe I'll make some of these larger little bits of that bleed-proof white kind of glowing, like we're saying that those ones are, like farther back in the distance, perhaps. Or if I put some kind of glowing around this little figure, maybe they're coming out like that. I don't know. Emanating light, perhaps. Alright, so we have that going. Let's put on some final touches on this scene in the form of some VersaFine black. And let's go bold, okay? I'm going to put an overhanging tree limb right in here. Okay, look at that. Oh, look. This is the oak branch. So it'll put us really kind of like we're sitting underneath this tree, perhaps. Now I look at it from right side up so I can get a better feel. It's kind of like this, maybe. I won't use the whole thing. I'm using probably half of it in a diagonal. Let's get a good impression of it. We'll see how this stamps over the top of that Dr. Martens. Dr. Martens might take it, but they're a little bit dimensional, so we'll see how it goes. because that paint, the Dr. Martens really sits on the surface of the paper, so it's like a little bead, you know, like sand or something like that, depending on how much got on there. Okay, it's not too bad. I think it's stamped pretty opaque over it. Okay, so that's one branch. This VersaFine is a pigmenting so that it also sits on the surface of the card. Okay, it's not absorbing like a dye-based ink would and staining the paper. So this more kind of three-dimensional, you know, kind of on a microscopic level impression has a good chance of stamping right over the top of other three-dimensional things, like in this case, opaque watercolor paint. All right, and but Dr. Martens is kind of a chalky surface too, so it's going to be absorbent, you know, and possibly take media as well. So that's why we're pretty good to, you know, utilize that. All right, see that? Like that, it's kind of containing that composition from above. I'll put one right here to kind of balance things out a little bit more. So there's our little figure. It really brings the attention right up there without having the kind of this open area up there. In fact, let me close it off a little bit more. A little bit of that, right? So, okay. All right, let's do something here. Let's add, this VersaFine is really, really dark. So let's layer this into the foreground as well, using value as our contributor for forcing distance. Darker things look like they're closer to us usually. Okay, so see that right there? See the darker version of it right there? Right. Let's hit it a couple more times. Those trees look, I mean, these leaves right here look pretty dark when I initially stamped them, didn't they? But then when you put this VersaFine black up next to it, you know, it really stands out much more prominently. Alright, let's go for a little bit of a different texture down below as well. So we have that. Looks pretty good from a spatial standpoint, huh? You know, we've got a good amount of foreground here. Or we have a good amount of variation, I should say, within that foreground space. This is the reeds. Okay. And from a textural standpoint, kind of creates a little bit of harmony with one type of form, and this one, multiple forms and shapes within that given space. And when you use a couple things in conjunction with one another, they can give you kind of an exponentially wider range of forms that are created by the two of them. Okay, so it's not just double, it can go up exponentially. Alright, so let's take a look at that foreground down there with those reeds. in that given space. I mean, doesn't it look kind of cool just in a composition by itself, even you to have background, midground, and foreground? And you kind of open it up like that. You get those little glowing orbs in here. We have our kind of figurine. So anyways, I'm trying to think if there's anything else I want to do in this. But I think that's pretty good as far as our visual statement goes. See if I want to add it. I don't think I want to add anything in there because I think it would detract from the that caterpillar. I was thinking I could put trees right back in here. I can do them in lighter versions too, but I think I want to leave it. I think these forms right here really look good as far as like a silhouette, and the negative space within those forms look good, so I don't want to layer that anymore. I've layered it a lot down here, but then when it opens up there, you can see more of the true form. But right in here, I think it looks pretty good layered in like that. See that wet ink? That'll stay wet for a little bit longer. Or a lot, I don't know. I give it like kind of overnight to dry, but all right, so, boy, this one's a tough one. I don't know what I would name it. Figure something out. This one will look really fantastic when sprayed too. Right now it's really deep and saturated, but it'll kind of dry to a dull sheen, especially down here, I think. So I'll spray this off at some point in time, and it'll return the vibrancy and saturation of how it looks right now when it's been freshly inked and stamped. Okay, so anyways, I hope you enjoyed this scene. I certainly enjoyed it. It's not a quick scene by any means, but it's certainly a lot of fun. I'm talking about a quick scene in relation to some of those that I've been doing, but yeah, that's my transportation submission to the Stampscapes Facebook group, which is a peer group. It's not created by Stampscapes, so, and that's the way that type of thing should be. Thanks for watching, and hope you enjoyed it.